Hi everyone. Today I'm going to talk to you about a bias binding and when you need to use a bias binding. I'm wearing my Carling Loves Cats quilted coat and I sell this pattern in my Etsy shop, and on this coat there is a curved edge, so around the collar and then also on the pocket, and it requires you to use a bias binding. If you use a straight edge binding, it's really hard to fit around the curve, but if you use that bias binding, then it's much easier to work it around your curves. So let's talk a little bit about the fabric so I can explain what the bias is. So when you have a bolt of fabric, pretend this is a bolt, they cut it for you right on the crosswise piece of the fabric. That's the width of the fabric. So on the top and the bottom, you have your selvage edges, and this is your crosswise. This is your lengthwise. And the bias is the 45-degree angle between your lengthwise and your crosswise. So typically when you're binding a quilt, it's all straight edges, and you can use the lengthwise or the crosswise to cut your binding because you don't have to go around curves. But when you're doing other projects, or if your quilt has a scalloped edge, you are going to want to cut your binding on the bias. So that means your strips are going to be cut at a 45-degree angle. So again, here's your selvages, here's the bolt, this is the cut edge where they cut it when you buy it in the fabric store, your lengthwise and your crosswise. And remember that crosswise, it's usually somewhere between 40 and 44 inches. So I have a piece that I've already cut. It's ready to go. So I have already trimmed the selvages. So, it started at about 44 inches. I trimmed the selvages. I actually trimmed a lot extra off my selvages because I'm working on a selvage quilt. So this is about 36 inches wide, but typically once you trim it, you're gonna have about 40 inches. So this is I bought a lot, but I trimmed a half-yard piece. So it's pretty easy to work with a half-yard piece all the way up to a yard piece when you're making your bias binding. I generally don't go bigger than a yard. Selvages on the top and bottom, lengthwise of the fabric, and I have a half yard here that I'm working with, and then your crosswise, which is about usually 40 inches, mine's 36. So let me show you how you're gonna do a bias binding. So what you're gonna do, you're gonna fold your fabric into a triangle. This line right here is your bias. You're going to want to line your bias up on your cutting mat, and that looks pretty straight. Fix that right. Okay, and then what you're going to do is you're going to cut perpendicular to the line that it's lined up against. And you're going to use your ruler, here's my ruler, to cut that diagonal. So make our first big cut. Okay, and then you just keep going. So typically a binding can be anywhere from 2 inches to 2.5 inches. I cut mine 2 1/4. I think the majority of quilters probably use about 2 1/4. So I am going to follow that line, 2 1/4, make another cut. And this is great because you don't actually have to have a ruler that has the 45-degree angle on it. A lot do, some don't. But this, you can just use the lines on your cutting mat and then your ruler line. You don't even need a 45-degree angle. Okay. And then move it another 2 1/4. So remember there's a quarter here, so now I'm looking for half mark. Okay. Okay, move it again. 1, 2 1/4. Cut it again. And then you get to the end and you have this little triangle. This is like your insurance policy. This is when you get to the end of the quilt and you just need a tiny bit more, so save that. And now go the other way. Okay, and that's how you cut your strips for a bias binding. So I have finished cutting my entire 1/2 yard piece of fabric into 2 1/4 inch strips. Now remember, they can be 2 inch or 2 1/2. I like 2 1/4, and they're all cut on that bias line. So now that you have the bias line cut, you do have to be careful because this line, it can stretch a little bit. I mean, that's the whole point, is that you want to be able to stretch it around a curve, but you want to be careful when you're handling it that you don't stretch it out, because it's not like elastic. It doesn't go back together how it was originally. So just be careful. So what you're going to want to do now is pin all of these together so that you can chain piece them on your machine and have one big piece of binding, so that when you're doing your quilt or your Carling Loves Cats quilted jacket, you know, it's all one piece. You don't have to stop. So what I like to do, I turn it right sides together and I look at it. So that is what one solid piece would look like. So then when I flip it, I just let it overhang a 1/4 inch on each side. You can see these little tails, 1/4 inch on each side, and then I pin it. And then you're just gonna sew the 1/4 inch seam. So I'm gonna pin it right here. So I'm gonna start sewing right here, well, right here. So the next one is gonna go right here. So again, I'm gonna lay it down. I'm gonna take my piece. So the reason I lay it down is so I can see it. So I can see this fits together. If I turn it this way, it doesn't fit together. Now you're gonna get to a point where you will have this cut on each side and you're just gonna have to fit that together. But that's easy to do. But for right now, you're just gonna flip this, leave a dog ear, 1/4 inch on each side and pin it. And then you sew your 1/4 inch seam right here. Let me actually pin it where I would sew it. So I would sew this line right here, and then when you open it up, it's gonna match up. And you just keep doing that until you're done. Okay, and now I'm at a point where I have 2 lines that don't match and the other side doesn't match either. So let me show you what I'm gonna do. So I'm going to fold this at this point right here, make a little triangle, match up that line down there. I'm gonna take a straight edge, just a little one, you don't need your big ruler, and I'm just gonna chop that 45-degree angle right there. Okay, so this is what I cut off, just a little triangle, and now they match up, and I can just continue pinning all the way down. Okay, and now we've finished pinning all of our 2¼ inch binding together, and now we just need to take it over to the machine and sew our 1/4 inch seam everywhere where we have a pin. Okay, so now I'm over at my machine. I have my 2¼ inch binding that we've cut and pinned. Now what you're gonna do is sew that 1/4 inch seam where we've already pinned, and you're looking to start right where those two fabrics cross. You're looking to end right where those two fabrics cross right here. So let me show you. I'm using a bright pink thread. Normally you would use a thread that would match your binding. So for this one, I'd use a dark blue, but I want y'all to be able to see it. So that's why we've got the hot pink. So I'm looking for where those two fabrics cross. And that's where I'm gonna place my needle. Hold your thread so it doesn't get sucked back in. And then just sew down your 1/4 inch seam line. Pull your pin as you go. And if your seam is a little bit bigger than 1/4 inch, that's okay. What is really important is that you start where those two fabrics cross and end where they cross, and then they will line up. And then what you're gonna do is just keep chain piecing. It's really quick. So just chain piece the rest until you reach the other end. And when you're working with this bias binding, be careful not to stretch it, because once you stretch it, it's not like elastic, it's not gonna go back to what it was. So just be real careful when you're working with it. Okay, so I'm on my very last one. And so after you finish the last one, you're going to iron open all of your seams. Still being really careful not to stretch it. And it looks like some of my seams were bigger than a 1/4 inch. That's okay. It's really, the most important thing is that you're going from that corner to that corner where the fabrics meet. That's the most important thing, because when you open it up, it's gonna line up. So you can see how you get that nice straight line. So you're gonna snip all these apart. You're gonna go over to your iron, and then we're gonna iron open the seams, and then you'll have your binding. Okay, so we have finished sewing all of our 1/4 inch seams of our 2¼ inch binding. Now I'm just gonna snip them all apart. And then once they're all cut apart, then we're gonna work on ironing open the seams. And the reason you iron open the seams is it reduces the bulk of your binding. Okay, so now we have one big line of 2¼ inch. Then press them open first with your finger, then come back with your hot iron. Just press open that seam. And I kind of like to lay my iron on there while I work on pressing open the next one. So give it a really good finish. Okay. Okay, so I'm on my last one. So remember, this whole time you want to be careful that you're not stretching your bias seam. And then now that we're all done, we're going to go back, we're going to fold it in half. Don't worry about these little dog ears. We'll go back at the end and snip those off. Okay, so once you've finished ironing your binding in half and clipping off all your little 1/4-inch dog ears. Now you can just roll it up and it's ready to attach to the front of your quilt or to your Carling Loves Cats quilted coat. Look for my pattern on my website. Thanks, guys.